Hi, I'm Lee Davies from Meet the Authors and also author of The Utopia Conspiracy.
Hi, I'm Rob Jones, also from MTA, and author of the Micklegate series. And on today's 50-minute author interview, we're excited to speak to John Hudson, survival instructor, broadcaster, public speaker, consultant, and chief military survival instructor. In addition to that, he's written a series of books called How to Survive, Lessons for Everyday Life. Hello.
Hey,
Hi, John.
how's it going?
How are you going? It's great to see you, mate. How are you?
Likewise, yeah, very well, thanks. And how are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thanks, for an old guy. You look great too. You look like you get a lot of fresh air, mate, don't you?
Yeah, that one. Yeah, I got fresh air. I do get fresh air.
I'll start by introducing to Lee, who, as I said, is a big fan anyway. So you could just have a little chat with Lee for a minute and then get back to me. Say hello.
Cheers, Rob. Lovely to see you, mate. Hiya, Lee. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Yes, when we're sort of going through, what can we do for Meet the Authors, and Rob said, no, a guy called John Hudson might be, and I was like, I know him.
Everybody knows him.
Yeah, you do then, mate.
So the Survive that series, I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I used to love that.
Oh, did you like that? Cheers.
Yeah,
it was really good last week. Actually, it was really good to do.
Yeah, it looked like you're all having so much fun doing it, and I love the fact that you'd get like the random things like the lipstick or a bowling ball in the middle of the Antarctic or whatever. I thought, great concept.
That was quite good fun. It was a proper brain teaser, when you know the principles you're trying to apply, and then to be thrown stuff that you would never see. With my day job, they'd never do anything like that. It's far too straight-laced. Yeah. So that was really good fun, actually. Good It's 10 years, I think. I know.
Wow.
Yeah, it's 10 years since we filmed the first series.
Cool.
Yeah. No, time flies.
I should start, John, by saying we are both honestly absolutely in awe of you and your achievements. I mean, you've done you've done remarkably well, and I'm very, very pleased for you, really. And I mean, I was going to start by asking you anyway, because you've done so much stuff. You did the TV. How did writing come about? Did they approach you when you were being filmed, or was it before or after? And how did that start?
The first thing I wrote, Rob, was the military survival manual at work, which is about, I think, 10, maybe less, but about 10 years before the book that I wrote came out, the How to Survive book. And the process for that was totally different. That's like taking lesson material and making it accessible to our instructors, because it was 2010, so we'd just got iPhones, you've just got YouTube, everyone's starting to access the internet, and there's a wealth of information online, but not all of it is sensible. And so in order to distill down all that stuff and make sure that our guys and girls were only looking at the good stuff and not teaching people to drink weed, that we put it all in a proper manual. So I spent a long time, and it's about 200,000 words of stuff. And then the bit that I was alluding to earlier was, because it's such a lot of material, you've got to put things in there so you know if people have actually read it. So I'm quite childish. I just started little jokes and things all over the place. So there's like elements of Spike Milligan in the sea survival bit that people would often find and go, is it true that the best cure for sea sickness is to sit under a tree? I'm like, yeah. So that was the first thing I did. And then the actual book, that came way after the telly, when you've got, you've sort of stretched yourself in other areas kind of thing. I wanted to test myself. And as Maslow says, one of the worst things for a human is to be ostracized socially. So I thought, if I mess up on telly, I'm putting my reputation out there. So I'd sort of got away with that. And I thought, well, what else can I do? And I had an interesting conversation with a guy in London about making the survival stuff translated to every day. And that became the book.
Yeah, brilliant. And good. It's really good too. I really, really enjoyed it, John. Great book.
So where did you start with all of this? Where did your fascination with sort of survival stuff come from? Because obviously you did like the RAF bit, but where did that sort of develop into survival?
I don't know, really. I always was outdoorsy, but then I think people our age tend to say that everyone was back then, don't they? So in the sort of growing up in the 80s in the Northwest, you're sort of throwing out the house early doors, aren't you? And you just get on with stuff. But then we went on holiday to the Yorkshire Dales each year, and walking in Dales was something I really grew to like and enjoy. And then I was lucky enough to join the Air Cadets in Ormskirk, where I grew up, and we went and did the Duke of Edinburgh schemes, and I really enjoyed those. That was in sort of North Wales and Snowdonia, so slightly steep terrain. And then when I joined the RAF, part of what we had to do was survival training for like fairly obvious reasons, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, you might end up in the wrong place. But that for me, because I'd done those other things, it was much more of a natural progression than it was for some people. And so I quite enjoyed it. I'm not, you know, I was in the minority by enjoying it. Let me say that. Everyone else wasn't in the same happy place. But I'd always lent that way a little bit. I remember the village I grew up in the Northwest. I remember going to the library in Parbold and getting survival books out to read when I was younger. So I'm just really lucky that I've ended up landing into that arena and doing it from a day job. But it was just it was a byproduct of my pilot training, really, mate. It's just one of those things that we all had to do. And I, having done a bit of outdoorsy stuff before, just enjoyed it more than most, I think.
And there must be some sort of there must be quite a difference. So you see a lot of these survival programs where, you know, the Naked and Afraid and things like that, where they're sort of planning to go into that situation. But I guess a lot of what you do is sort of the unplanned survival. It's when you're not expecting it. And
yeah, it's a funny one. You kind of you're hoping that it doesn't happen, especially for the people that we're training. Yeah, because it isn't like the telly version. You know, if the people that we train, or when I was doing it myself as a sort of an aircrew person, if they enter a survival situation, there's a really high probability that people are injured, possibly killed. You know, it's not a kind of, you're not camping by volition. You're in a fireball probably, and you're there 100% by misadventure. Yeah. So there's a difference in outlook. So it's something that everyone is aware of as a potentiality. And I've had several friends who've, you know, had life-changing injuries or aren't with us anymore because of these kinds of things. So you're acutely aware that it's a possibility. And then you prepare your mind and your kind of pockets as best you can, because there's not a lot of space in some of these vehicles for loads of extra shiny kit. And the mental preparation is key. And then you just sort of park that. And then if that emergency happens, you kind of go through it in a checklist format in your head. You know, we get drilled into that. One of the flight reference cards that I remember most is just red down the edge, and it's what you do if the main gearbox goes in the helicopter. And there's not a lot you can do. You just land really, really quickly. But it's that instant decision that you can't waffle and think about. You have to just crack on straight away. And so we try and instill a survival mindset in people where they've pre-thought the worst that could happen. They've come up with a little schema of what they might do, and then they just put it in a box at the back of their head, so it's ready when they need it. Yeah, it's different. It certainly isn't, you know, the same flavour as the telly stuff I've done. That was much more. Yeah, jolly.
Well, that brings me on to your book. I loved your book. It's a really, really good book. I mean, I know you've got a series, but I haven't written all of them yet. And I know you've even covered stuff like COVID, which is amazing. And that's part of my question, really, that basically one of the things you're saying is, you know, I deal with these extreme situations, but the attitude or the principles you can apply to almost anything. So I was going to ask you, do you think that's the case, that there's nothing out of bounds? And I won't be insensitive and specific, but I know you've been through a difficult time recently. Yeah. Does it make you equipped to deal with almost anything in life, do you think, that it can be adapted and applied in that way?
I think it does, Rob. I don't think it necessarily means that you're going to deal with it faster than a normal kind of scenario, or that you're going to, you're not going to suffer emotional hardship. But I know from personal experience and from the testimony of people who've read the book, I've had some amazing feedback. So I've had people get in touch who've read it, and the tenets that I've tried to distill are, it's like a skeleton kit. It really is something that can unlock a lot of difficult situations. And I've had people reply who've had personal grief from deaths in the family, people who've lost children. I've just had one recently from a person who's held hostage in Africa for 6 months, and that guy working for an international aid agency said that having read the book, it helped him in captivity for 6 months. You know, phenomenal stuff that people are having to deal with psychologically. But it's a process that it probably is common sense to some people, but unless you have it explained to you, I think it can be behind a bit of a glass wall.
Oh, absolutely.
That you can't get through because you know what I mean. It's one of those where I wanted to tell everyone about it because I found it useful for me. Yeah, and it was it's what I used, mate, when I was writing the book, because I've not written a proper book before. So I used the thing I'm writing about to unlock how to write almost.
Yes.
It was that sort of stepping stone process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's often, as we said, because we've been talking to a few different people. They're mostly self-published people we talk to. But, it's usually that they feel they have something to say. And you've got lots to say, haven't you? And what is bizarre about your experiences, you could be sitting having a coffee one day and you're saving somebody's life 1,000 miles away. Like you're, person who's been kidnapped. It's uncanny, isn't it? Because of what you passed on.
Yeah. Yeah, potentially, and that's the sort of the golden nugget that you want. You want the thing, from my world, you want the thing that you've passed on. You want that to have a positive impact on someone and make a difference. That's the goal. It's a vocation. What we do where I work, it isn't something that you do just for the money, because it's not that well paid. You do it because you love it and you want to help. It is service. It sounds cheap, but it really is. And then what I was able to do through my day job was teaching students to start with, and you can only do that to so many students in a year. And then I started to train instructors. And then the telly stuff, that reached a really wide audience. And by trying to pass that kind of skeleton key of knowledge on through the TV thing, you're hitting 10-fold, 1,000-fold more people each time. And if some people remember it, then great. I know one of Jen's friends from college, her life was saved by one thing she'd seen on a different TV program. She had a bad crash in a car, but remembered one thing and managed to avoid getting injured. And I wanted to have that sort of impact. And then writing and the stuff that's spun out from it, I think that reaches a wider audience, because then you start getting people passing it from one to the other.
As you know, I used to manage services with very vulnerable people and people on periphery. Yes. And, when we're dealing with problems, nearly everybody got all the emotional stuff first. And yet the things that solve the problem aren't they? So, it is uncanny what you're offering and what you're doing out there. And I think as soon as you mention somebody like survival instructor, most people wouldn't get that, would they? That, this guy's going to help with my loneliness sitting in the house and not seeing anybody. Because it is, isn't it? It's that stuff.
And I blame the telly. But the telly has changed people's perceptions of what a survival instructor is, I think. Because 20 years ago, when I told people what I did, they were like, oh, right, that's quite interesting. And no one had a preconceived idea about what it entailed. And a lot of it is psychological, it's mental preparation, and it's coping in adversity. Whereas now you say that and people assume that you're chasing wild animals down and trying to bite fish's heads off. And that is just not what's what. And then the second question is always, so did you drink wee? No.
Yeah, no, they sensationalise it, don't they? And it's that of it a little bit, doesn't it? Yeah.
A little bit.
Over to you, Lee. Go on. Lee.
So I was going to say, so you wrote the Siri, the survival manual?
It rhymes with beer leaves. It's Sear.
Sear. So when you're writing that, obviously, that's obviously quite structured and a formal way of doing things. Yeah, when you were going through that, did you actually think, that could be used in real day life? That's something that could be switched over. Does that form any of your book?
I think that came about 5, maybe 8 years later, actually, that realisation. I've been lucky that I've had a lot of time to sweat in this, rather than just doing, a lot of people just do 2 years and then go and do another job again. And because I've done so long at it, I've been able to reflect a lot more. And it was only really quite recently, so probably 7 or 8 years ago from now, that I started to see its really, really widespread application. Just from, you get to see quite a lot of interesting people. We do an annual meetup, and all sorts of people come to it who've had incredible experiences on the edges of existence. And by hearing their versions of what happened to them, and by working with some really preeminent survival psychologists like John Leach, working with guys and girls like that, suddenly it all starts to make a bit of sense. You have that eureka moment where you think, well, actually, hang on, this isn't just applicable in an aeroplane crash or a boat sinking. I've witnessed this now in people having mini meltdowns at the printer. And I've seen these sorts of things happen in what are kind of trivial situations. And it's a pattern of behaviour that, if it's applicable across a whole range of human experience, then surely the coping mechanisms only need a slight tweak to work in those situations too. And I think it was that realisation Some of it which only happened through the process of writing, because you get into quite a philosophical space, don't you, when you're writing?
Yes. I was going to ask you about that, Nick, because just put a bit of context. This started, and interestingly enough, Lee and I have never met each other physically yet, because he's in Bournemouth and I'm up here. But we had very similar ideas about, particularly again with self-published authors, there's quite a difficult process and people are taking advantage of, and they get stuck in the process through many of those stages in the process. And even, for instance, I've written the book, I don't know what to do. But we talked a lot recently as we've been doing this about trauma and therapy, and both Lee and I unwittingly started to write after something very difficult today. With me, it was a bereavement. And I was just worried. I was wondering if you found the process cathartic, because you probably started, like you say, to say what you had to say. But do you find it actually helps you as you write?
I definitely think that. I couldn't agree more. It wasn't a particularly significant anything in my life that triggered the writing process. But what I did find is, whilst doing it, you do tend to spend a lot more time in your own head and thinking about things more deeply than you perhaps get a chance to. I think you do get into an almost meditative state at points. Or I found I did. I would work for 4 days, and I was doing it in my time off, so I'd work for 4 days. And what I found for me was, if I could get a couple of thousand words per day for 4 days, that was a good session for me. And then maybe on the 5th day do a bit of editing and going back over it. But if I tried to do more than that, I ended up on a bit of a negative treadmill. I found my peak performance tended to be in that kind of 4-day window. And what I would find is, about the 2nd or 3rd day, when I'm really in my stride, that's when not revelations, but that's when like the light bulb moments would happen. And it wasn't always necessarily insight into my personal situations like you described, but it would be potentially things that have been in my subconscious for a while that I haven't quite unpicked to do with the topic, that then suddenly seemed a lot clearer.
And I was going to say, do you sort of have a plan of what your book was the chapter's going to be, and go, right, okay, I'm going to do these chapters and then go in and fill in the blanks? Or did you start it and just go, right, I'm going to wing it and just keep going as I go until I feel I'm going to stop?
It was the answer A out of those two, actually, Lee. Mine was pretty structured. So I was lucky that it was published by quite a well-known publishing house, and with that comes quite a lot of good support. The editor I was working with, Jamie, was brilliant. So it was very much a creative conversation. So he knew that I knew a fair bit about survival, and that I had this idea that he could translate it into every day. And I have a protocol that I go through in my day job about how to impart that information, very much from a training and education background rather than from a storytelling background. And then the conversation, I just said that when I'm teaching a lesson, I always try to put an example in, because I think it gets people involved. They can envision themselves perhaps in that person's shoes. And that conversation said, well, let's do the chapters like that then. Let's do the chapters like a mini lesson. And because it was a kind of a deal that we'd done, my target was by point X, which was probably a year in the future, I had to have 100,000 words on survival in the everyday. And that was my goal, and I'm task and goal focused, goal oriented behavior is my kind of thing. So I'm like, right, okay. I got a year planner out. I went 100,000 words by that date, worked out how much time off I had to do it in, worked out I therefore had to do it between 1,000 and 2,000 a day for X amount of days. So you're literally whittling down the thing to get to it. And I just started doing it that way. What I found, though, was that on day X, because, I've probably been brainwashed by the military, I handed in my 100,000 words, plus or minus, I think, 5%, whatever it was, so 105K, and I heard nothing. And the creative conversations had all stopped. I'm like, oh, no, what now? And then eventually Jamie gets back to me, because he's always busy. He says, mate, the thing is, no one does it on time, and so you're actually really early. And to answer the question about structure, the creative conversation didn't end. What he then had, he as a very, very skilled editor, he now has 100% mountain of clay that he can play with. And so the conversation continued from there. And we went through probably 3 or 4 different variations on the topic, using my words in different sequences with slightly different, kind of like a music producer would dial up different elements in the orchestra, just to make the final product more of an arc. And it's much better for it. If it'd been down to me, it would probably be very, very similar to the things I was knocking out at work, which were much less colourful. But with me and Jamie having that creative conversation, it was
brilliant.
It was a really good sounding.
I was going to say, we find that there's different people have these different styles. I'm very structured in exactly the same way. I mean, on our website, we've got downloadable planners and things like that where you can actually do your chapter and character planning and so on. So yeah, I plan everything out on mine. Yeah, other people do have it where they sort of just wing it.
Yeah. That's a bit like me, but when I started to write, I had no intention of doing so, and I thought it started with some. I don't know if I told Jen this, but I started with some paintings. I was painting first, and I thought I want to write about this, and I thought this will get done when it's done. I'm going to give it time when it can do. I think it's up 12 months, mine. But still, I don't write. I mean, Lee could, like you, he could have a planner there. That would be his book, but, I'm not quite the same, a bit more scatty in the way of doing mine.
Well, it's horses for courses, though, isn't it? And you wouldn't want everyone to be doing it the same way. I think between the two of you, it sounds like you've got the perfect balance. But when you're advising other people on how you can tackle it.
Oh, hopefully, yes. I think we got a good set of skills between us. Hopefully that we can use and pass on. Yeah. So, what's coming up, John? What's coming up? What have you got in the future? I mean, there's some exciting stuff happening, isn't there?
Yeah, it's interesting times, mate. So I really enjoyed writing, and then as you sort of alluded to earlier, there's been a lot going on in my sort of family life. And we're almost sort of reaching, pardon the pun, but reaching the end of that chapter. My sister and I are now stuff that we're sorting out with Oop North. So I'm ready to do a bit more writing, and I've been putting a few more ideas together. Nothing's got beyond maybe 3,000 or 5,000 words worth of ideas, but I think that to back up what I wrote in the last book, there's the other half of the coin, which is to do with the stuff that you carry around with you, physically and metaphorically. And there's a lot that can be said about that from a survival perspective in like, personal life, as well as obviously in jungles and deserts.
Yes.
So I'm keen to try and do that, but I've also had some interesting conversations with the publisher in that London about writing some military history stuff, because the storytelling parts of the book went down well. So, I mean, you never know, do you?
No.
You never know. And I was lucky. I went to do a talk with work last week at the base where all the Chinook helicopters live, and I was lucky enough to meet John Peters, the Gulf War prisoner, and we had a really good chat about stuff, and and speaking in public and things like that. Because I quite enjoy passing the information on that way as well as in the written form. So might do a little bit more of that. You never know.
So when you slow down, which will probably be when you're 90, I think you should try some. I think you should try some novels as well.
I don't know.
In that vein, about the stuff you know.
I've got a mate who'd be worth chatting to, actually. If you want, I can put you in touch with him. But he's an ex-paratrooper.
Wow.
A very, very, very good survival instructor. Like, he was the go-to guy where I worked for years. And he's a proper full-time civilian now. But he's done a few books, self-published. And he's written some fiction. And I tell you what, mate, I was privileged enough. We were coming back from like up north on an Arctic survival thing. I was sat in this Canadian Hercules, and he had it on an iPad, and he let me have a quick flick through his draft manuscript, and I couldn't put it down. I finished the thing on this flight. It was absolutely phenomenal. But it's hard to do if it's something completely different. I know you've got some amazing time travel novels, haven't you? I couldn't go near anything as out there as that.
I don't know about amazing, but yeah.
I think it'd work, actually. I think the stuff that you've done, and you've experienced, the stories you've got could work well. I mean, the one that I've done are all sort of historical sort of conspiracies that I've just wrapped up into a story, but the 95% of them are fact. It's just the end bit I just twist a little bit to make them all work. So I think the stories you've got could probably blend quite well.
Yeah, the books you've got already, I think somebody could take them and almost turn those into novels. I think you've already got the experience and the material. It's worth thinking about one day.
I just have one other thing. When you first got your book through the door, your very first one, the feeling for you when you first got that. That's always a moment, isn't it?
It was cool. Yeah, it was really cool. There was a little box to them came. And I tell you what it was that I wasn't expecting, because I'd seen the mock-ups, the sort of digital mock-ups. It's the feeling, it felt different because it was like not the weight, but the cover of the hardback had like a silicone feel to it. It's probably some clever marketing trick to make you go, ooh. But yeah, I do remember that. I don't know. Yeah, great. It is when you first get your hands on it.
Yeah,
John's one of the few people who can get away with having his face that big on the front of the book as well.
That was not my choice, I hasten to add, Rob.
I'll not be doing that,
mate. They insisted. I wanted knife fighting monkeys.
John, thanks so much for doing it. We do appreciate it because we also know how busy you are. So it's
absolutely fine. It's an absolute pleasure, and thanks. I'm flattered to be asked, gents. Thanks very much indeed for having me.
It's great.
Online to chat.
No, thanks very much. Really appreciate me, coming on and nice to meet you.
Best of luck with the project, lads. It's a really good idea, and I'm sure it'll really help a lot of people. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Thanks a lot, and give my love to Jen. Okay, I'll see you soon. Hopefully.
And ours to you guys. Take care.
Thank you. Cheers, John. Bye, mate.
Thanks, John.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye. That's all from us. So until next time, stay safe and keep enjoying those books. Please make sure you follow, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Facebook and Instagram. And for more author interviews, how-to guide and useful tips and tricks, head over to our website at meettheauthors.net.